they kill us with our love. I was just talking about this the other day, how, digging into the metaphysics of quality has me thinking more metaphysically in general, I guess. And this is a dim apprehension that I can barely put into language, but it seems like maybe we are the battleground through which these metaphysical moral organisms are locked in some form of Darwinian combat in a way. This could be God and Satan symbolically, I guess, but this metaphysical organism of evil, it thrives and exists like we observe some parasites in nature by putting on camouflage. In this case, moral camouflage, right? This is the obvious example here is the Soviet, from each according to their ability to each according to their need, puts on this utopian moral camouflage and then perpetrates its opposite outcome. And I can't help but sense that very social dynamic that possessed Soviet Russia is the same fucking thing that's possessing people today, right? It's like, get your vaccine so grandma lives. It's putting on this moral camouflage again, disguising itself, preying on the compassion of people, actually. So this natural sense we have to want to preserve our community and take care of one another, they're preying on that base instinct to then perpetrate its opposite at scale. And it sounds maybe crazy, but I can't help. We know that, and you've probably experienced this I think through plant medicine, you often directly experience this, that we're like embedded, we're one layer in a lot of layers of dimensions. And I just can't, my sense is that there's a higher layer dimensional combat taking place that we're just like, we're part of it. We're participants in it in a way. Like we have the ability to self-reflect and be like, holy shit, I can see this thing within me. The line between good and evil drawn down my heart kind of thing.
I think honestly, man, when you were saying those things, there was a lot of resonance there. And it's all the thing that came into my mind is like, we're like the transformer boxes of electricity that we're the conduit that the various voltages are coming through, the
medium of exchange between heaven and earth kind of thing.
We're the medium of exchange. We're the transformer box. And we are the avatars, like you said. Within us is the moral battleground is taking place in our psyches and then manifesting in action in this world. So it is like quite literally like the transformer box of the voltage comes in and we turn that voltage into output.
Yes.
By channeling and going through that internal battle. But the killing, the communism idea of it's both fitting and on point that what you said there, that with communism, it feeds on compassion, and it does, because what communism by definition is the scaling up of empathic family systems to the state level.
Yes.
Only let's say the currency of empathic capital only works at the scale of the family.
Exactly.
It doesn't work through abstracted, bloated bureaucracies, because you don't have empathy. So from each according to his abilities to each according to his need, that's totally true with you and your daughter.
Of course.
But it's not true when you've got Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum and a bunch of his cronies.
So that's what it's preying on, right?
Yeah, it is preying. And the John Coffey quote in The Green Mile is, a lie that tells a deeper truth.
You love your sister. You're making a noise. You know what happens? I'm gonna kill her instead of you. You're making a noise. I'm gonna kill her. You understand? You understand?
You kill them with their love. They love each other. Now you see how it is. That's the way it is every day. That's the way it is all over the world.
If you watch the film again, it's a great movie. It's Stephen King, the second of his prison films, the first being Shawshank Redemption, because he wrote both.
Yeah.
And it's such a truth in John Coffey, because he effectively is saying every time he goes through this mystical experience of taking the illness from somebody and taking the pain and the suffering, and trying to bring life back, it destroys him. And by the end, he actually wants to die. He said, I see so much pain now. I've seen so much pain and suffering. Like, I want you to execute me.
Right.
And that speaks to the idea of life is suffering, is having to endure these forces.
Yes.
In the hope that you make things better.
Yeah. The other thing that's really interesting to me is that this battle, it's not like we say moral and in our inner psyche and then manifesting outside of us, but the manifestations itself, there's a feedback loop between how we practically implement things in the world and how it feeds back into our psyche. Like we talk about money a lot, but these are all sorts of tools, all sorts of systems, even the ideas we're organizing ourselves on. Core to all of this, and this is where I want to think out loud and connect it to MOQ, is that Western civilization is premised on individual property rights. If civilization is this socioeconomic system we're mapping to the truth of reality of self-ownership, once we start to blur those lines, we're decreasing the resolution, and we're actually decreasing the quality of our existence. And so that seems, and that's what all these fucking systems prey on. Communism is that, right? It needs to deceive you out of your own property. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Moralistic camouflage, an excuse to like short circuit your little Dunbar number perception into inviting in violations of property. Because it's not enough to be, it's not energy efficient enough, it's not sustainable enough to just steal from everyone, go around rampage and being an imperialist, right? That's a disequilibrated structure. They actually the parasite needs to deceive the host into inviting them in.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's not sustainable energetically. So that's what it feels like to me. And this all comes back to property. That's why it's so fucking important.
Yes. And the nature, the last thing you said there, that the forces need us to invite them in.
Yes, we have to sign the contract.
We have to sign the contract. And what's changed over the last, let's say, 3 permutations of global conflict is the scale of the conflict has changed, because now we no longer have, as a global civilization, we no longer have the shadowy alien cultures that are so unknown to us that we can constantly make them appear like the boogeyman. So, the powers that be have run out of boogeymen. Like, they exhausted the Cold War, they exhausted the war in the Middle East, they exhausted the terrorism thing. And they effectively changed the format of the hot war is no longer a viable option in terms of its scalability, its practicality. If you were to distribute, for example, the entire armed forces across let's say the people that you want to possess, first of all, these people want to possess everyone. It's not even a national, it's not even a nationally a national incentivization. It's not like America wants to take over Russia. What it is the people that have the economic power want more economic power. So a hot war is game theoretically not viable, because you destroy what you, if you go and invade New York, you're not suddenly going to have acquired all the economic power of New York's infrastructure. Or if you go and invade Silicon Valley with a Chinese army, you destroy the infrastructure of the digital networks that you want to acquire.
Yes.
So I believe that what they realized over the last 50 years, and I think it's when I say they, I mean, let's say the existing power structure of those that run the most centralized, let's say, source
shareholders
of
of central banks and World Economic Forum members, basically.
There we go. The people whose entire livelihood is based upon the manipulation of signal, the maintenance of a curtain through behind which they sit, pulling levers. They recognize that the only way to sustain this power in its third iteration after the First and Second World Wars and all the hot wars were run out, they realized that they had to change the form of domination, and that domination is a it's a soft power domination, which it's happening in the bodies of billions of individuals.
Right.
And in the chaos that ensues, the people that have this, let's say, strategy are going to utilize the illness and the suffering as a revenue stream to maintain themselves. And they're going to reallocate all of their resources from hot war, physical conflict into pharmaceutical conflict at the microbiological Cold War level. And that's where the border closures are coming in. It's about having a Cold War that's predicated on this is all for your own good.
Yes.
For your safety. And that was the term. That was the Nazi term. This is for your safety.
Right.
It's the same thing. They've just changed. They've changed the scale. It's now at the resolution of the microbiology.
Yes.
This is why families can't see each other. This is why they're burning churches in Canada. This is why we are seeing the constant idea that you cannot group together and discuss things, lest you come across truth.
Yes.
Lest you rediscover what the family connection is, and the state does not want you feeling that family connection.
That's right, because the nuclear family is the element, the constitutive element of society, right? It's what keeps community together. They're trying to break that down. And this gets me back to the dark thought that I shared earlier, is if everything we're exploring here, if there's some modicum of truth there, and that violation of fiat currency, it's distorting the mechanism through which we exchange our values, but it's also violating property rights. That's all fiat currency supply expansion is. Full stop. That's all it is. It's just theft. There's nothing else to it. I'm very hard on this point because on an a priori epistemological basis, that is a fact. You can't even argue with it, right? When you print money, one group prints money, they're just moving property from one group to another at their own discretion, arbitrary. There's no equitable economic benefit whatsoever. It's just pure theft. So that is blurring the lines of property, right? We're destroying private property rights, which is the basis of civilization. This is the fundamental Judeo-Christian substructure of civilization, as we've covered. So my dark thought, and when we look at the history of Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany, Maoist China, those were all premised on the violation of property rights, right? Just like you're saying, for your own good, for your safety, we're going to do this, raise this army, print this money, whatever. If that is true, if there's some modicum of truth there, and we are today in an unprecedented degree distorting fiat currencies, that we could be walking into, with eyes wide open, the darkest period in human history. If they normalize these injections, get our immune systems on a subscription revenue model where people are just accustomed to getting these boosters once every 6 months or whatever the frequency is, this now gives them a vector to insert whatever they want, whatever, right? You could nanotechnology, genetic therapy, who fucking knows what's in the thing. And I'm especially concerned here because, to your point, hot wars almost off the table in a way in a post-nuclear world, right? Because it's just mutually assured destruction, especially between superpowers. So in a way, nukes have kind of imposed this peacefulness in a way, because it's like the guns are just too big. Like, you can't go to war like we have been going to war. But what does that mean? That doesn't mean this darkness, this metaphysical moral predator goes away. He adapts, right? He needs to preserve the host. So it's like, well, I can't take the host to hot World War III. Otherwise, I might not have a host after all is said and done. So we're going to adapt. And the adaptation, if these are nanotechnology or genetic attacks, you could wipe out vast swaths of the population while preserving infrastructure, basically. So you could maximize evil and genocide in a way, just kind of like inflation, right? Because inflation's not visible, we're able to steal time at a much larger scale. So because if there is this genetic or nanotech version of genocide, because of its decrease, it is less visible, therefore it can be done at a much larger scale.
It's mortifyingly elegant in the sense that if you are prone to psychopathological traits of having zero empathy, and you're playing this as merely a game where human beings are simply expendable chess pieces.
That's why it's darkly Darwinian, right? When you see some of these strategies in the environment, how a fungus possesses an ant and then is, brutally grows into it to infect the rest of the thing and cause a colony collapse. It feels like that.
It is that, and the genius of it is that, let's assume that a large percentage of people are wiped out by this in the next few years, and I believe that in the next 2 years we're going to start to see some pretty horrendous. The fallout's going to start to become apparent. But the amazing thing is that it also breaks down when you going back to your property rights being the foundation here, is that what this strategy achieves is it quite literally takes off the table the defensive barrier between those at the top and the property that they want to reacquire, such as housing and whatnot. Because if the people die, they can't even defend their property in terms of rights. So it's effectively about collapsing from within, and it's telling to me that the Chinese and Russian army aren't required to have vaccinations. The vaccinations are being pushed on the West, and are not, and this is pure. All of this is speculation, of course, but let's just say that it's speculation based on probability and psychology. I believe that what we're seeing is a merger and acquisition strategy, a hostile takeover, where effectively, if you think about the West and the superpowers as being companies, there's simply been that Joe Biden, this member of the Senate for 50 years, who has a track record of being there at all times conveniently, is conducting. If you look at all of his actions and his policies over the last 8 months, they're confusing only if you assume that he was intending to work for the best interests of the American culture.
Right.
But all of his policies and actions make absolute sense if you assume that he is effectively delivering on behalf of another company.
Yes.
Self-destructive protocols to destroy the competition.
Yes.
Such as destroying the culture of the American army. Like, for example, LGBT politics and gender politics and identity politics, the divisiveness of those, they're being bred into the military. The military are being pulled randomly, seemingly, out of Afghanistan. All of the various policies that simply make Americans feel like their culture is the fabric of the culture is coming to pieces, is because that's the intention. And when it collapses, it will be a very easy thing to mop up for those that from a superpower perspective. There's a game here. I don't know what's happening. I don't want to sound like one of those conspiratorial, this is what's happening, but clearly if you look at game theory, this is a complex situation.
So what you're describing is like potentially the most cost-effective conquest in history too, right? It's like, again, the organism, we're calling this metaphysical moral organism, is adapted to take out its host in a new way that won't destroy it, right? It's maximizing the suffering of the host, maximizing the lifeblood that the parasite can extract while keeping the host on the edge of life. It sounds like. So my question is this,
sorry, Robert, just before you ask this question, the art of war, Sun Tzu, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting.
Yes, exactly.
Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt.
Yes.
Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. These are all, anyone who studies the strategies or stratagems of war and sees war as a multi-dimensional, multifaceted, deceptive, it's like the Game of Thrones.
Yes.
This is all these people do. This is their lives. Nothing is honest. There's careful consideration of the messaging at all times.
Yes. It's an excellent point. And this is ancient wisdom occurring before our eyes, the failure is when there's an inability to identify the forces at work. That's what keeps people locked in this spell, right? And there are multiple puppet shows going on here. Critical race theory, group identity politics, Biden, Trudeau, like all the different individual actors too. People get distracted by them, failing to see the systemic issue. So my question is, how do we identify the precise forces at work here? What are they? Is this a Judeo-Christian versus a non-theistic or satanic force? Like I keep using this Judeo-Christian language, but that's the deepest thing that I have access to. Like we think God, and again, God reflected in work and property rights and civilization, and the enemy is known to be the deceiver, the destroyer, like everything antithetical to that. That's what seems like is at contention here, but that's just the best language I have access to. What is it actually?
Well, I think that what I believe that these highly developed mythologies and religions are the best attempt at giving form to these impenetrable forces. And the Judeo-Christian mythology is let's say, given our cultural development and our cultural background, it is the highest resolution description of these forces. And I believe you're right. I believe these are, over the last year, I've come to believe that these are genuine forces. But like if you put loads of metal filings on a piece of paper and then move a magnet underneath that paper, you would never see the magnet, but you would see its effect.
Yes.
In the movement of the filings. We are the filings. Yes. We are the filings, and the forces that manifest are coming from a realm that we can't perceive.
Yes. Emanating from somewhere beyond space and time. Something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that when people describe the idea of, let's say, holy ideas and holy, let's say, holy warriors or holy missionaries, or holy, the terminology that describes this idea of pursuing a higher ideal, they conversely have to use a language system to describe the opposite, which comes with it, let's say, the very biased and very tainted terminology of Satanism, which is well, how else do you describe the opposite of the good? You have to describe this manifestation as Satanism. And I actually think that studying psychopathology, that eventually, once people truly become lost, they do actually become identified with that symbology as an actual feature of their identity, that they actually gravitate towards it willfully and proudly, but they know that it must be maintained as a sort of secret. And because the human psyche the ego is a master of repression, and I don't mean any of these things like secret societies, like even the word conspiracy is a loaded term, but these people do exist, and the more they exhibit pathological tendencies, the more those pathological tendencies will end up resolving as an idolization of the dark forces. And this is where all of our most potent myths gravitate towards, because they speak a deeper truth. Right. The idea of Sauron and the all-seeing eye. I mean, Christ, is that not a representation of this move towards a centralized new world order of digital AI that gives you social credits?
Yeah.
I mean,
the panopticon.
It's the panopticon. It's the eye of Sauron.
Yes.
And
which, by the way, panopticon, right? Pan as in every, opt as in see. It can see everything, right? That's what this is.
Yeah. And one thing that I do find very interesting is from the perspective of coming from filmmaking, this references filmmaking, and it also references serial killers, because there is actually a parallel between directors and serial killers, which is that deep down, they both want to be caught. And what I mean by that is that when you think about a film production, and I'm talking about like a high grade film production of creators and creatives that really know their craft, that are experts, and they put a lot of time and planning and effort into every frame is a carefully considered piece in this tapestry of an experience that goes on over 2.5 hours. When you put so much thought into the hidden architecture of that experience and the subliminal messaging, you know, someone like Stanley Kubrick, for example, who was a cerebral master in what he planned out with his films, that we still to this day, the crew still discuss the things that he was, you know, specific decisions that he would make that were beyond insanely detailed.
Yeah.
And when you're a master at that level of storytelling, you leave breadcrumbs so that those who are hopefully as smart as you, that you want them to recognize your work and your craft, you leave breadcrumbs in there so that if you're ever caught, you can say, I was so aware of that genius decision that I left a clue there that would confirm that I was the creator. You know, so filmmakers, for example, will leave, they'll leave, like, for example, little things, like tiny things, like in 2001 Space Odyssey, HAL is the name of the computer. Do you know why HAL is called HAL?
I don't.
So if you look at the alphabet and you move every letter right one place, HAL becomes IBM.
Yes, okay.
Because it was a commentary on what IBM was doing with its AI development. It was that HAL is a representation of IBM, and you get these
and
various...
IBM got its start in Nazi Germany too, right? Systemizing the murder of the Jews and others. Yeah.
And it is also the company that is developing the software for the development of the COVID tracking software.
Wow, of course.
That they are the ones that are developing the software for the COVID health apps for tracking all of your details. It's insane. History repeats itself. Yeah. So these filmmakers, and let's say that Stanley Kubrick is the representation of a moral manipulator. Yeah. Well, that same psychology exists in serial killers that, you know, like the Zodiac killer, for example, who left these puzzle pieces. He was enamored with his own intellect and he wanted to leave these puzzles to show how smart he was. Right. But one of the features that police use when they're in a serial killing investigation is the police are told to be highly vigilant of any well-doing citizen that comes around asking how the case is going, just out of curiosity. And the reason is that most of the time, if some do-gooder comes by the police station, or sees a policeman out and about and just goes, oh yeah, how's that thing going with the serial killer? Like, it turns out that the majority of the time it's the serial killer, for the simple reason that the serial killer wants to hear how amazed they are at how difficult it is to solve the case. They want to have their ego confirmed. So they're actually
fishing for an ego stroke by interacting with the cops.
They're fishing for an ego stroke. And then when you apply that same logic to what's happening with let's say the grand manipulation of let's say geopolitics, you see weird anomalies that are left in the quote unquote evidence of what's taken place. And coming from film production and coming from media production, people think, oh yeah, everything that just comes up on screen, it's just there, it just emerges. No, it's carefully planned, it's edited, it's selected, it's staged. There is a huge amount of staging when it comes to what comes out in the news. And you see you know, some things that people would say are coincidence, but others could say, well, if you were to do this grand plan and you wanted to ego stroke, you and your buddies wanted to ego stroke that you are creating this world order, you would leave these obvious breadcrumbs in the nature of your duplicity, because that's what egotism is. It's the desire to love yourself above others. Yes. And you do see some even like the naming of things is very concerning with the whole COVID-19 thing.
This is sorry, just the Petersonian idea that the intellect or the ego has this tendency to fall in love with its own creations above even the creative principle, right? Which is more like dynamic, ineffable quality. That and that maybe that's the predator parasite host predator prey relationship here, is between that system of representation, that static system of representation trying to overturn the dynamic creative force. And although it's a futile struggle, it can be done in the short run, at least, to great cost and expense of everyone being preyed upon.
Yeah, absolutely. And another Peterson, like Peterson idea, or Jungian, I would say it's a Jungian idea, that in order to be your full potential, and let's assume that what you said at the beginning of this conversation, that we are actually channeling these forces, these voltages, that Peterson, explicitly in a practical sense says that you've got to be dangerous to be good.
Yes.
You've got to have the capability of being
Right.
of being evil in order to be good, because otherwise it's not a choice.
Yes.
And Jung said, the idea that when it comes to looking for God, the problem is they don't look high. It isn't that they don't look high enough; it's they don't look low enough. They don't go down into the shadows and realize what they're capable of. And ultimately, I think that those people that are the most influential in the ways of the world are the people that have been through the trauma of experiencing and learning that they are capable of immense evil.
Yes.
That they are capable of maliciousness, of selfishness, of I see it in myself sometimes. Like I find sometimes I become repulsed by my own emotional reactions to things when I get to frustration, and you realize, oh, that's that energy, and you have to learn to combat it and
to harness it. Combat, but you have to harness it,
integrate it.
And integrate it against its macro manifestation, right? Like you can't just be, you can't be this soft, passive, peace-seeking person. What's the old saying? If you want peace, prepare for war, right? You have to integrate the shadow so that you can fight the manifestations of the shadow in the world. Even
there's a quote from Bruce Lee. Someone asked him, you go around and you talk about all this idea about peace, but yet here you are training for war all the time.
Yeah.
And Bruce Lee's response is, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than to be a gardener in a war.
Fucking amazing. Wow. That's so good. Hey, everybody. As you've no doubt learned by watching this show, Bitcoin is the single most important asset you can own in the 21st century. And one of the most important companies in Bitcoin today is NYDIG. NYDIG's mission is to get Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible. One of the ways they are accomplishing this mission is by empowering banks and financial technology companies to offer their own Bitcoin products and services. As a true game changer in the industry, NYDIG is safely unlocking the power of Bitcoin for forward-thinking individuals and institutions alike. Led by Robbie Gutman, Yin Zhao, and Ross Stevens, NYDIG has absolutely exploded onto the Bitcoin scene recently and has quickly become a leader in this space. So, whether you are a professional investor looking for asset management services or a company looking to white label your own Bitcoin product or service, consider NYDIG your single source solution for everything Bitcoin. We're channeling these moral voltages, which I think is maybe the right, that's a great way. I like the framing of that, because what did Tesla say? That to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of frequency, vibration, and energy, something like that. Like we're very material focused, especially in our Western worldview, that it's atoms and things.
Yeah,
but
substance.
Everything's an energetic pattern, as we've gone through extensively. And so it seems like that that eternal dimension, or that dimension beyond space and time, is somehow moral or value. And that is part of us. That is the moral dimension that's propagating through each of us. Maybe our heart is what taps into that initially. I think I've shared with some of this, my instinct previously with you, that maybe the heart is actually more of the master organ. We typically think the brain is the thing, but if the heart really is generating ultimately our choice and values, right? You really choose your values with your heart in a way. Maybe that's what's tapping into this deeper reality. But then we, as the media of exchange between space and time and this transcendent dimension of value or morality, okay, we have this auto-poetic way to actually choose how we channel that voltage. And that seems to be encoded in these stories, at least, right? The stories of the Bible. So I guess what I'm trying to determine is so you said earlier, those stories are the best mapping we have to this metaphysical theater that's taking place. Is it then that war? Like, is this Christianity is at war now with something that's non-Christian? Do we need a new religion to emerge? Do we need a synthesis between the two? Like, how do we, in high resolution, identify the forces at work for others, right? What I'm getting to here is education. It's like, hey, everyone, I know you thought COVID mattered or LBGTQR mattered or critical race theory mattered, but I'm here to tell you these are all distractions to cover up X. What is X, right? It's not enough to say they, and not enough to say the elites, not enough to say even central bank shareholders in the World Economic Forum participants is too amorphous, right? It's like, what is the fundamental force? What is its source? What's generating it? What's propagating? What do we do about it? You know, because again, it seems like we can make practical implementations that put checks on this force. We know that if you can make property rights more expensive to violate, you can put a check on this evil force.
Oh man, there's so many factors to this. So let's this is such a big, you know, existential challenge, because like you say, there's all these different disciplines that cross over here. There's like the interpretation of mythology, there's the idea of, you know, the religious belief systems and what they mean and what their source is. So let's start with the source of what's happening in the world right now. And I would say, let's start by MOQing it. Like, let's put it into the framework of MOQ. I don't think that the voltages that we're experiencing as manifested in the actions and policy making of central planners that manifest in the let's say the malicious and nefarious let's say imprisonment of the masses for the sake of personal gain. I don't think that's motivated by some bespoke force. Like there's like literally a Satan force that's just in the guts of existence, that's just there. Going back to MOQ, I believe that what's actually happening is that, let's say in the context of the universal cycle that we're familiar with in modern parlance, which would be the Big Bang, which would be the beginning of time. At the beginning of time, in this worldview, consciousness was blown into infinite fractal pieces, and effectively, it is now, over the last billions of years, it's slowly been reconstituting itself. As we mentioned, with the inorganic forces, with gravity, with mass valuing itself, and then once mass comes together, it then sorts itself out into relationships that are highest quality to its goal of furthering its freedom from constraints. Once we move into the inorganic forces of chemical compounds, the pursuit of freedom was achieved through the element of carbon, because it could steer itself into new combinations, etc. That then created the biological entities that then could start to operate in the pursuit of freedom through fight, flight, or freeze. And then up to social, and then up to intellectual, onwards and upwards. I believe that the things that we would describe as the satanic antithesis to the pursuit towards that moral ideal, is merely the backwash or the aftermath of these pursuits solidifying into self-sustaining ossifications or attachments. So
the residual from prior creation, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. The residual from prior creation. So the moral act left behind it something that was at one point a moral creation, but in its pursuit to try and maintain its own existence to the detriment of the moral force continuing its path onwards, it becomes what we would term evil. Which is why in the biblical sense, I believe that the idea of Satan being a byproduct of God, that you know, Satan is, God created everything, including Satan. Well, of course, as an unavoidable byproduct of the pursuit of moral creation, you create the very thing that becomes that wants to hold you back. And when you look at the totalitarian state, it is effectively a corruption of the idea of, let's say, family organization for the sake of property acquisition.
Yes.
Scaled up, but without having the higher principles of freedom as an attribute of decision making. It's basically like, well, freedom. We've got a strategy here for the acquisition of maintaining our attachment to things that we believe we're entitled to, and we are going to execute that plan with zero empathy.
Yes.
And then that stratagem learns that the easiest way to do that is to abuse other people's compassion,
right,
or other people's moral compassion.
Yeah,
and
because it can get them to work for you through that.
Exactly. And I believe that these static strategies of imprisoning people and the absence of empathy and the absence of a moral compass, or at least the corruption of the moral compass towards south instead of north.
Yes.
I believe that what that actually isn't a conscious force at all. It's an unconscious residue.
Right.
In other words, it doesn't have any life.
Yes.
It's the absence. And it reminds me of that scene in Lord of the Rings. I forget where there's a king in one of the lands, and he's become like this decrepit. His eyes are frosted. He's like this old frail man, and he doesn't speak. And he's got that character that Sauron's agent sits by his side and whispers in his ear and tells him what to say. And he's basically in a coma. And he's a bad king, not because he's conscious, but because he's unconscious. And I believe that that's what evil is the unconscious protocols that maintain a lower level of attachment,
unconscious repetition of prior patterns, right?
Of prior patterns. Yes, exactly. So it's effectively a self-sustaining pattern that continues to try and self-replicate its previous strategies that worked at a lower level.
Right. That were necessary at a lower level.
That were necessary, which is why the idea of Satan in the Bible isn't a contradiction.
Right.
It's effectively saying, like the act of creation.
Yes.
There's a necessary evil to this act, and it's unavoidable.
Yes.
And if you want to have the beautiful love for your daughter, you're going to have to be standing on the foundation of a lot of other stuff that happened prior that unfortunately created some really hideous shit. It's the cost of creation.
Right. It's the cost of creation.
It's the cost of creation.
So I want to add some feedback here. Things that made me think about. So one, taking it back to the inorganic level, it's actually the constriction of freedom from gravity that ignites a star originally, right? We have these huge nebulous, literally a nebula, it's a cloud. When it becomes sufficiently clumped together and gravity becomes strong enough in that agglomeration of mass, it collapses into a star and ignites, right? So it's the freedom it's a constrictive anti-freedom force, if you will. But when it creates that star, now the star is the furnace in which the elements for organic life are forged.
Yeah.
So it's creating this constriction, is creating the possibility of future freedom, or you could think about this as progression into the next layer. So the inorganic layer, through its own constricting its own freedom, is now creating the possibility for transcending into the organic layer by making the heavy elements in the hearts of stars, which later explode and seed the universe for life. So maybe that's one aspect of this residual from prior creation in a way. And then I think too, when you say residual, I'm reminded of the number 6, which is again encoded in the Bible. It talks all about the remainder, right? And that book, The Language of Creation, talks about the remainder being a reference to this satanic force, right? That there's creation, which is complete, but anywhere you see a remainder, that is a symbol of evil. And they talk about this, like certain animals that have remnants of a tail, things like we have. This is also something that manifests itself biologically, right? It's like maybe it's some form of collateral damage or just leftover detritus or something from the process of creation, right? Like the process of creation is imperfect and it has this weight on it.
Yeah.
And then so and to your point where you're saying that the unconscious repetition of prior patterns that were necessary for prior freedoms. So this would be equivalent to saying here on Earth, we needed gravity to form the star that formed our life. So now we're just going to all worship gravity and just lay down on the ground all the time and not do anything. So there's this like, we have to work with this prior detritus of creation, but to worship it as if it is the greatest thing would actually totally destroy life and civilization and prevent further progress into higher fractal layers.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. And then we could even go so far. We've talked in the past about
evil's looking the wrong way. It's like looking backwards and saying that's what we should work towards, instead of realizing, hey, we need to accumulate our freedoms here and look towards getting to the next layer requires some higher order constriction, which I mean, you could possibly insert Bitcoin here as the thing. It's a higher order disciplinary force on our freedom. But by giving us the bounds within which to operate, we can create something new. It's a common disciplinary force that
it is. Yeah,
we can't corrupt the meaning of, something like that. Like you can't
corrupt
gravity.
The meaning of, and it reduces through various economic dynamics. It reduces the incentivization structure to try and maintain attachment to things.
Yes,
and that's let me re-clarify that. So evil is, let's say, the creation of a moral step forward is the creation of something. Static patterns are the strategy through which you defend and maintain that step forward. But then as the moral forces step forward again, evil, which is the static maintenance, is when the force that wants to maintain attachment to those static gains tries to prohibit future further moral progression. Right. That's when it becomes evil. And the more at odds with the moral step forward the static pattern is, the more evil it will feel to us. So for example, let's take a practical example. Using the MOQ's categorization and its tiers, you've got inorganic forces, you've got biological, you've got social, you've got intellectual. So someone, when America is formed, you've got the Declaration of Independence, and you've got the Constitution, and these are all codifications of the moral ideals of freedom and liberty and the right to private property, which arguably in the last 2 years I've gained a deep appreciation for what that means. It isn't just, oh yeah, this is a cool set of papers. It's goddamn, it's everything.
Yeah, and it's all reducible to property. Once again, just to simplify.
Yeah. So it's all reducible to property. So let's take a slightly immoral / unpleasant deviation from that moral ideal. You could say, well, and free speech, of course, free speech being systemic to that. That if there's a temporary, and as we know, nothing's ever temporary with government. If there's a temporary violation of any of those rules, that's bad.
Yes.
But what would be the most evil representation would be an act of trying to prohibit the movement towards that intellectual ideal by going in reverse. And that would be, well, how can we prohibit social circles? That would be one tier down. So we're going to stop people from seeing their families. That's pretty evil. But then we can go further than that. Well, what happens when you start attacking the biological foundation? Well, now let's murder the members of those families.
Right.
So what you end up seeing is the further down the ladder of evolution that you try and rug pull from, the more we exhibit a gut reaction that is morally reprehensible.
Yes.
So that let's say that the intensity of our awareness of evil is correlated to the degree to which these static patterns try to drag us back down to previously established tiers.
Would the atomic war be like an inorganic rug pull, almost splitting the atom?
For example, one of the most, let's say, subversively evil concepts that is floating in the world today under the cloak of climate control is the idea of depopulation for the good of the planet.
Right.
as if we're not part of the planet,
Right.
as if human
Right.
life is
Right.
the cancer,
Right.
and actually grass was the whole goal of the planet, was just grass and cattle.
Right.
Like that was it. Like that was what the planet wanted.
Makes
We
no
were an
fucking
accident.
sense. Yeah.
It makes no fucking sense. So the idea that you would depopulate the humanity for the sake of the inorganic and the biological.
Right. The metric has to be based on human flourishing. It doesn't make sense to remove humans from the equation.
Exactly, because if you could ask the planet as a total consciousness,
Yeah.
we would be seen as its proudest children.
Yes.
Like it would be proud of us as its most like advanced children. In the same way that if you were to ask a parent in a family, who do you have more adoration for, your pet or your daughter? You wouldn't be like, yeah, let's fucking kill the daughter and keep the pet. You'd be like, if I have to make a trade here.
This is agape expressed. Yeah.
Yeah. Remind me of agape, because that's
the love between a parent and child, actually. So
yes, agape.
Well, Vervaeke lays out the three forms of love, which are Eros, which is consumptive love. There's another one that's like the love for I forget the second one, but agape is the love between a parent and a child. So it's you love your child even though they are a non-conscious agent, right? When you bring that baby home, there's no reciprocal interaction. Oh, that's the second one. You can have romantic love, which is reciprocal interaction, or friendship. Yeah. You could love a bag of potato chips you want to consume. You clearly don't want to consume your friend or romantic partner. You want reciprocal interaction. But with a baby, you don't even have reciprocal interaction when you first bring the child home. It's just a blob. Yet that is the greatest love. That is the greatest love you have, right? It's agape.
Yeah.
And this is what this is the love encoded in Christianity too. It says that is what the highest order principle of reality is. God is love. You know, God gave his only son. He sacrificed agape for his other children and all these other things. So
okay, so now let's take those three categories, and they line up directly with MOQ. The love of potato chips, consumptive, is a biological affection.
Yes,
it's about consumption for the biological satisfaction of your body.
Yeah.
The reciprocal love is the social quality, which is the idea of going into a relationship with somebody for reciprocal love. And then the idea of your love for a child is an idealistic love, because it's a love for which you receive nothing in return.
Yes, right.
No, that's the highest. That's the highest form of love.
It's Eros is consumptive love. This could be love for potato chips, or just love for sexual gratification too. You know, just lust.
Well, they're the same. They're the same family, right?
Exactly.
Sexual gratification and potato chips are the same.
They're the same energy, right? If you've ever experienced like lust and hunger, they're like this animal energy. Filia.
Well, you say that. Well, you people say that when they're sexual, they say, "I'm hungry for you."
Yes. Yeah. Like exactly.
We metaphorically say that.
Yes. Yes. Philia is the love between friends, or true love between a romantic partner, something you want repeated reciprocal interaction, mutual flourishing, right? That's that kind of love. And then agape is love for a parent's love for their child, which is based on something transcendent, right? Like, what do you love? Like, there's nothing to love there other than something. You're not getting anything out of it. Actually, it's destroying your life in basically every way, right? Literally.
And that also kind of goes to show how the systems fight with each other. That, for example, in a broken, in psychology, if you've got like a broken marriage, it's amazing how damaging the introduction of a child can be to the dynamics of the couple. Because when one of the partners becomes obsessed with loving the child, the other partner can feel left out, because they're not. They feel resentful. They feel neglected. So, and that would be a failure of them being developed as sovereign, as their own sovereign kingdom.
Focusing on the wrong level too. And one of the things in the Bible says, love God above even your spouse and child, right? It's to love that higher order principle. To love agape, I guess, above even the love for your child.
And you could, in the practical sense, for example, like Martin Luther King, just as an ideal, like a simple example of an idealist, the act of pursuing that high ideal that we could say is God, the thing that's above the physical realm, that he was manifesting what the Bible says there, because he was actually putting the worldly things that he loved in danger by the pursuit of the highest ideal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like by virtue, anybody that puts themselves on the line to pursue an ideal risks losing the things they love.
Yes.
And that is actually a manifestation of that idea of love God above
Yes.
even your own family members.
That's right. Yeah.
And those people, when they do that at great personal loss and risk,
Yes.
those are the people that we adore throughout history.
That create the most change. Yeah. Wow. That create the most freedom ultimately.
Yep.
Yeah.
And freedom, and given that freedom is arguably the repeated and recognizable trait of all levels of evolution.
Yes.
The consciousness is building freedom systems.
Yes.
Then anything that represents the pursuit towards freedom, it has to be the closest thing to God that we have.
Right.
You know.
Right. I was thinking about this the other day. So we've said this previously, that another definition of value is that towards which all action moves, right? Like even in, this is Austrian Economics 101, you can't do anything you do as an expression of your value. We all have this rank ordered set of next actions in mind or in heart, wherever it is. And whatever we're doing in any given moment is by definition an expression of our highest value. If it were not, we would be doing something else. If you valued something else more, you would be doing it. So it's like, you can't, it's an a priori thing. You can't, action is an expression of value. That's it. So value is,
and even inaction also falls into that category. So when you're depressed,
inaction doesn't even technically exist, right? Because so action in the Austrian school is defined as purposeful action, basically. So there's a purpose behind it, and it's human. It gets a little blurry, but for human beings, we operate with a purpose, or at least we presume each other operate with a purpose. And to take inaction, like you have a purpose, right? My purpose is to not do anything. My purpose is to
no, 100%. Like that's what I meant. Like even when, for example, when somebody has trouble getting out of bed in the morning, what that demonstrates is that, let's say, some aspect of their total personality has decided that it's valuable to not pursue anything.
Right.
So even that is an action. It's like the fight, flight, or freeze. When you don't want to get out of bed, you're basically in perpetual freeze mode, which is, I don't want to fight, I don't want to run away, I just want to curl up and not participate. Yes. And that's a form of low grade value.
Yes. No, agreed. So if we just say value, one definition of it, at least, this is another thing that's so hard to define because it's metaphysical, it seems like, that toward which all action is oriented, or that which all action expresses. We know this in the human domain. I think MOQ would extend this into the inorganic and other domains as well. We learn in metaphysics of quality that all of these fractal layers are moving towards greater freedom, ultimately, right? The ultimate would be the ineffable, indescribable, cannot be encapsulated dynamic freedom, which is like this pre-intellectual cutting edge of reality. That is towards which everything, it's simultaneously, this is paradoxical too, it's kind of driving all of the change, but it's also that towards which the static patterns themselves are moving. They're trying to better map to this dynamic reality, right? To create higher freedom or higher resolution, ontology or something to that effect. And my thought the other day was this. So all actions moving towards freedom. MOQ is moving its layers towards freedom. Its static layers towards greater freedom. These, if I try to define God, if I try to put it into words, I land on freedom, truth, love. And maybe I'm limited. I know clearly words don't do us complete justice, but we know if God is unlimited, right? He's omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. That is by definition pure freedom, right? You're everywhere. You know everything. You can do anything. It's the ultimate form of freedom. You have optionality goes to infinity. Your freedom is absolute, basically. Truth of God would be, if he is this unlimited, infinite, in every dimension principle or force, that is the ultimate reality, right? So if we're just defining truth as a portrayal of ultimate reality, God is truth.
Yeah.
And then love, if it's this generative, I guess we're talking about specifically agape here, which they distinguish in the Hebrew and Greek text. It's not that God is love like Eros or Filia. God is agape. So this selfless love from parent towards child that makes no sense logically. I mean, it's absolute selflessness. Let's just put it that way. I don't want to say it makes no sense logically, but it's this total self-sacrifice, right? This generative self-sacrifice, if we want to call agape that. That's what the universe is doing, right? That's the other side of the metaphysics of quality coin, where it's just dynamic quality is generating all of this endlessly, selflessly. Those are creative principles: freedom, truth, love, right? Like freedom creates, if you have a free market, it creates more wealth and abundance. If you have truth, it's generating pragmatic truth. It's generating accurate prices, useful tools, moral virtue, or at least enabling them to emerge. Maybe not creating, but opening reality to them. And then love is this kind of, I guess, principle we're trying to embody through that process. Like when we create more wealth, we're pulling ourselves up out of the muck, reducing the impact of scarcity on us, and we're working towards this higher Christian principle of love, right? To show towards our children, but then to show towards one another. This is something else the Bible says: love your God above all else, love agape above all else, and then love your neighbor. Show agape towards your neighbor. So it seems like there's a deep connection here between MOQ and creative principles.
I've just made the connection there of something that I want to run through, and this will need a visual just so we can see the alignment.
Yeah.
We've talked about MOQ and the core categories which relate to, let's say, the human physiology are biological, social, intellectual. Biological being the value system of your body, social being the value system of your heart, and intellectual being the value system of your intellectual principles, right? And intellectual is not the right. Intellectual comes with baggage because it makes it sound like a very cold, right, mechanistic thing, but it's not. Intellectual is the pursuit of high principled ideas, put it that way.
Towards metaphysics, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now at the biological level, and now let's so that's the MOQ categories: biological, social, intellectual.
Yeah.
Then there's the archetypes of Robert Moore, which maps also onto the idea of triune brain theory, which matches to MOQ as well, which is the reptilian complex is what Robert Moore would call the warrior archetype. And that's effectively the biological drive to maintain, to fight, flight, or freeze, basically. Yeah. Now, arguably, the singular purpose of the warrior archetype is to maintain freedom, because the warrior effectively goes into combat and stops the undue oppression of its own movement, right? So when you're being oppressed, you need to fight to be unoppressed. So the warrior would effectively be freedom. At the social level, the archetype would be the lover archetype, which is love, which is was that agape?
Agape, yeah, love between a parent and child. That might be more Filia at the social level. It's between friends and romantic lovers.
So at the social level, you've got the currency of the value currency of love.
Yeah.
And then at the intellectual level, which is what Robert Moore would call the archetype of the magician, which is the pursuit of high ideals, you have the pursuit of truth. So actually, freedom is the domain of the warrior, because it fights for its own freedom, and it fights for the domain to be maintained for the other members of its group.
Yeah.
The love is maintained by the limbic system, which is the lover archetype, which is the social quality of MOQ. Yeah. And then the intellectual level is the magician, and it traffics in the pursuit of truth.
Right.
So actually, truth, love, and freedom also maps on to the triune, the holy trinity of MOQ,
yeah,
triune brain theory, Robert Moore's archetypes. It maps, because truth is the intellectual realm. Freedom is the pursuit of the biological realm.
Yeah.
It fights for its own physiological freedom.
Yeah.
And then social is the realm of love, which is the idea of interconnectivity with other biological entities.
I like what you said earlier too, because it seems like, I mean, just to make it even more complicated, each one of these creative principles, freedom, truth, love, sort of has a fractal expression too. Because if we split love apart into Eros, consumptive love, Filia, social love, friendship, romantic love, and Agape, love, parents' love for their child. You could say Eros is biological, Filia is social, Agape is intellectual.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the love of the child is larger than, but contains within it the previous two levels.
Yes.
Because the child is something you selfishly, as a parent, you do want to consume the time and time with your child. You want it, there's a selfishness to your to being with your child, right? That you love it so much, you want to, that's why people say, you know, oh, I want to, some people say, oh, your child is so cute, I want to eat it. You know, like, it's that energy comes forth.
Yeah.
But then there's the social level, which is that idea of the reciprocal love that you get from your child. But then above that, it's like the Russian dolls. Above that is the idea of a selfless love, which is that even if you could never see your child again, never get any time with it, you would fight for the conditions that would give it a future. So that they are, let's say, as Pirsig says, they are independent and discrete, but running in parallel.
Yes.
And those three forms of love that Viveki talks about do those things. They are independent, but they're also, let's say, that each one contains within it the seeds of the new one. They're discrete.
Yeah. Yes. And I actually, funny, I read this just last night. I always read Lila before we talk. And I was reading, I want to find maybe you know where this is in the book, the description of these these static value layers, because he analogizes it to layers of computer construction. The thing that what I want to zero in on is he says there is only a very specific connection between layers, and it's two-pronged. It's a mapping of memory systems, and then there is a something language, machine language instruction repertoire.
Yep. The MLIR.
Yes. So I want to understand, just out of my own interest, like mechanically what that means, because I thought maybe the MLIR, it's a protocol basically that's saying, and I'm not exactly clear, but between the memory mapping and the MLIR, they are mapping symbols from one level to symbols of another, or patterns of one level to patterns of another. And so I couldn't help but think, if that's not something that money is effectively doing, right? We're mapping our patterns of action onto money. And then other market participants are just seeing it, mapping it to their intellectual level, and then mapping it back down into their own actions. So that's kind of what the price is like, working between these different levels.
Well, there's something really fascinating about money, metaphysics, and metaphors, because let's talk to metaphors first of all, because what metaphors do is they allow for the translation of ideas between completely separate domains. So language, for example, when we take an abstraction, that something that can't be physically held, and we want to describe it, we will use the language of the body in order to make that concept, let's say, understandable.
Or visceral or real.
Visceral. Yeah, exactly. So, for example, like I love you so much, I want to eat you. It's like I am analogizing you to something that's delicious that my body values a great deal,
right?
And I'm telling you that as a gesture.
Yes.
Well, money is the ultimate meta exchange, because it translates. If the body is organized into biological, social, or if human experience is in biological value, social value, and intellectual value. And each of those categories has a product or service. For example, a massage is for the biological, a calculator is for the intellectual, a frisbee is a product for social interaction.
Yes.
Then in all these different domains, you've got all these different products and services, and money becomes the ultimate metaphor, effectively a language repertoire for which you can say, well, this completely separate entity, which is a service in the social domain, I want to be able to purchase it with something that I can also purchase, a product or service from the biological or the intellectual domain. So
and
money
the inorganic
is the
too,
metaphor.
Right?
And the inorganic, because commodities and property, as in like purchasing property,
real estate,
real estate. So money effectively is like what the wording you would use, or you used is what is it, a right to claims or claims to rights?
It's a call option on savings or capital, basically. But capital capital can be at any of these levels you're describing.
So like Aristotle, said that one of the most important things is having a high command of metaphor. Somebody who has a high command of metaphor is basically ahead in life. And you could equally say that someone who has a high command of money is ahead in life, because having a high command of money means that you have the ability to navigate or take action in multiple domains.
Wow, it's a universal metaphor, right?
It's universal metaphor.
Because now
it's a universal metaphor.
You can equate all those levels in dollars, right? This commodity costs $40,000. This massage package costs $40,000. The frisbees, you can equate them at least in the numerical dimension.
Absolutely. And then somebody who has a high command of let's say, metaphor can communicate and traverse and navigate lots of different domains, because they're able to translate one set of domains and map them onto another, which is effectively the ability to translate value from one domain to another using a specific language. So money is a language, metaphor is a language. It's logos, effectively, in some sense. Maybe that's going too abstract, but it's a medium through which you can jump domains.
I argue that actually that the specifically prices expressed in money, they are the logos. They're an expression of the logos. It's when you speak, you're voluntarily taking in sensory data, running it through your filter, and then representing something through your speech. Money is the same. You're taking in sensory data, running it through your filter, but now you're expressing it in your action, right? It's actually even more consequential. When you buy or sell something, it's creating actual physical effects on the production processes in the world, versus speech can be ignored, it can be distorted, it can be misinterpreted. Like money cannot necessarily, right? It's like when you buy a house, you're sending a signal to this collective organism called the market economy to produce more houses at the margin. And when you sell a house, you're doing the opposite. Like, we need less houses. And it's that dynamic equilibrium that's maintained through the pricing system that is an expression of the logos. I would argue a more consequential expression of the logos than speech itself. Now, I know speech is more pervasive and more commonly useful and probably even necessary to develop a pricing system, but the pricing system moves the world more than words.